IPMA special interest groups are an exploration. We're up to a lot of really cool things right now. We are doing, what we're really all about is just exploring and trying to bring people together around some of the bigger questions that we're all facing right now. So we're trying to do a couple different things. We're trying to help people advance in their careers. We're trying to help people advance their industry and to uncover new thoughts, new ways of seeing the world. So it's a lot of really interesting things going on. We have 5 different global special interest groups right now. So the way this whole special interest group thing came around is that we are the IPMA, right? The International Project Management Association. And as we were thinking about this, the challenge, if you will, that we're trying to solve here is, well, we're all in our own countries, right? We all sort of do work in our place of work. Some of us are more international than others, but as the IPMA, what we really want to do is to make an offering out there to the world to help people step into a more international venue, to see how other cultures operate, to understand how projects get done in different parts of the world. So it's been a great start. We've been at it now for a couple of years. It's really starting to take off right now. So thrilled to have you all here. You can see here that we've got these 5 different. Right now, we have 5 global special interest groups: mega projects, artificial intelligence, smarter cities, innovation and change, which is the one that we're sort of operating around today, and then the smarter U, which is smarter universities. And each one of these looks at project management and how work gets done in these areas. What are the new things? So, for example, in mega projects, I know right now there's a lot of discussion around agile and mega projects. These two things maybe traditionally don't go together, but we're starting to look at that. So along the way, we have a webinar series, and this webinar series is kind of a nice way to just bring topics into the fold to begin to talk. So I am really, really thrilled to introduce to you Dr. Lester Hoffman and Skip Pettit. Skip and I have known each other for, gosh, what is it now? A good 15 years.
20 plus years, yeah.
20 plus years, right? So, so we've been working together off and on over that time, and it's lovely. And likewise, Skip and Lester have worked together for many years. So this has been a really, really, I've known the work that they're doing for quite a while. And so I thought this would be a really nice venue to begin to talk about a new book that they are that's just on the cusp of being published. So let me just switch here, and I'm going to get right into intros, and we're going to dive right into the heart of it here. A new share, and I'm going to share this guy right here. Boom. So everyone should have these slides in the chat. If you haven't seen the chat, pull up the chat and you'll see the PDF file sitting in there. All right. So today's discussion is really, pardon me, is really a discussion around the future of remote work. We are all at home. We're all doing work, but there are some challenges here that are going on that we need to really begin to think about. And so Skip and Lester in their work have been tackling this. One of the outcomes that they've done is they've written a book, and the book is The Ultimate Guide to Remote Work, 900 strategies and insights. And so we wanted to kind of orient around this. And what we've done is pulled out just a few of the key trends that are going on, and we'll have some discussion around that. And we will, Miguel, thank you. Okay. All right. So let me work on that PDF here in a second, guys. So I think that so let me introduce our two stars here. Skip Pettit, author, trainer, consultant. He has been a program and project manager for many years. Has taught more than 25 workshops on project management in the U.S. And around the world as well. He's the co-author of The Ultimate Guide to Remote Work. He works with a really prestigious list of clients: U.S. Department of Defense, Navy, Pentagon, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Secret Service, all the people you hear in the news these days, really. And Skip was a presenter at the Best Practices Week, along with Lester. So we thought we'd bring him back for a reprise. Let me also introduce Dr. Lester Hoffman, Harvard PhD in cognitive psychology and instructional design. He has been a part of more than 30 projects as project manager. So both of these gents are well-versed in the ways of projects and project management. Lester really focuses a lot on scientific documentation. How do we make information management better, more streamlined? Co-author of the PMIQ, the best-selling prep kit for the PMP exam, and also co-authored, along with Skip, The Ultimate Guide to Remote Work. So Skip, Lester's clients include IBM, Credit Suisse, AT&T. So you can see here a really nice mix of government and private sector. So gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce you both to this and to turn this over to you, Lester, to talk about some of the future trends.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you for inviting Skip and me and your gracious introduction. I think we all know today the workplace is changing at an unprecedented rate, and in particular in unanticipated ways. We're very likely, according to most surveys, to never return to the old normal way of working, where the workplace, a physical building we go to every morning as our quote job, is the norm. There's possibly not going to even be a normal way of working. Many organizations have decided they're going to have anywhere from 30 to 100% of their workforce working remotely. Remotely can be at home, it can be in a satellite building, it might be at a Starbucks. One of the things that's happened, we've noticed the last 7 or 8 months since the pandemic led to much greater numbers of remote workers, is that many chronic team problems and flaws in communication, leadership, alignment, morale, conflict resolution amongst project team members must be addressed and resolved. We thought maybe some of these things have been nailed down, but what's really emerged is the fact that in the remote environment, they're really showing up that we didn't necessarily have the best practices in effect. So these are needed for distributed teams to be effective. Skip and I will talk about some of these today. We have 15 trends in this PowerPoint that will shape the future workplace, and we hope you can use the insights from these trends to drive your work life and help your career advancement, both in your personal and your organizational level.
So next slide, evolving workplace. Our workplace is changing at an unprecedented rate. We saw a statistic last year from IBM that was mind-boggling, that they think that the body of knowledge is doubling every 12 hours. So nobody has ever had to deal with an influx of data and information at the current rate that we're facing it today. So Lester had the situation where his wife had to return from working from an office to then working at home. And there was a transition there, and Lester will tell you a little bit about that later on. But some of us who had been working at home found the transition easier than others who had never worked from home. In my current situation, I am a consultant and a trainer and an author, and I'm able to work from home. But my previous job, I drove 200 kilometers a day, 150 miles a day, back and forth to work. And now to be able to just get up and boom, be at work, that's a blessing in one respect, because it's much less stressful. I don't have to fight the Washington, D.C. traffic and do the get up and build margin into my life 2 or 3 hours every morning to make sure I get to work on time. But the counterpart to that is that our family and work life is now melded together, and that has created some serious issues.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about some of the new skills that we need to master, given that
sure.
knowledge is doubling every 12 hours.
Yeah.
One of the new skills is what we call 21st century information management skills. And they include in particular the need to have much greater ability to assess the reliability of your information sources and the ability to evaluate the quality of information from the internet or from other sources. You need to know who experts are, how reliable they are, when you need to go to new experts. You need to know which of your practices are still the best practices or which are outdated now. As knowledge is changing, you must adapt a learning mindset where you cannot assume that what yesterday was the best information is the best information today, or even what was the best information 6 hours ago. This means becoming a much more astute internet researcher and much more able to find required information quickly from sources that are highly reliable, and to work with your team, your project team members, to find out if they have better sources than you do. Also, one of the things I'd like to say is working with Google, of course, which we all do. I think it's very important to not assume that the sources that show up in the first screen, the first 10 or 20, are necessarily the best ones, because we know there are many, many reasons why Google's algorithms have those particular sources show up. You may have to go to the next 10 or 20 or 30 even to find sources that you can vet as far more reliable. So those are some of the new information management skills needed to deal with this knowledge explosion we're talking about. Skip, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, the bottom line is that continuous learning is the only way that we're going to be able to remain competitive in this ever-changing situation. And as we go through the slides, we'll talk about some other things that really we need to keep in mind is the members of our project team and the stress that they're feeling and the challenges that they're feeling and the isolation that they're feeling. All of these things are rolled up into this addressing this new work situation. But continuous learning obviously is a key piece. Yeah, Tim, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. It just strikes me, two thoughts. One is that it strikes me that right now, here we are in January, we've been through many, many months of this where a lot of the workforce who has not been used to working from home, I think, we had this sort of punctuation point of the holidays, but now we're all sort of realizing there's months more of this kind of work. So what do you think? I guess the other sort of point was this idea that it's all about mindset, right? In other words, continuous learning to me is all about my willingness to be open to, knowing that my assumptions may be wrong. And as a project manager, it's always a tricky balance. My assumptions might be wrong, but I somehow have to forge forward with a set of assumptions.
That's true. And communication is the backbone to that, and humility. And we talk in the book about the importance of emotional intelligence and getting a true sense of who we are and where we are,
Yeah.
and what things we can control and what things are out of control. And if we might go to the next slide,
Yeah.
this is a good segue to that, which is part of our role as a project manager is to sustain what is important and our core values for our organization and our projects. And so if we're not careful, this forced separation that many of us are feeling can erode the relationships and the camaraderie and the trust and core factors that go into a strong, inclusive, respectful workplace or project. So this number two, and just so you know, we've given you 15 different topics, but we're only going to talk about the first 5. But each topic has in red some exploratory questions that you on your own can explore and just think about, because sometimes we get so busy doing what we're doing that we don't step back and think about what it is that we really need to know, what's really important, and what things should we focus on without micromanaging the people that we work with. So number 2 says, in the hybrid workplace, erosion of organizational culture is a clear and present danger. And I think that's absolutely true. You just can't walk down the hall and bump into your colleagues, and you can't just go meet somebody for a cup of coffee and do things in the traditional way. And so we have to come up with some creative ways to be able to maintain those relationships and that connectivity. So
I'd like to add, I think it's more important than ever for project managers, program managers, and team leaders to articulate the core values, the organizational culture norms to all project team members on a routine basis. I don't mean giving lectures. I mean just reminding people that, hey, you know, we have to have respect for all your team members. Hey, you got to understand that some of your team members are on a phone call at 4 a.m. at their time, but we still want to have the appropriate kind of intercultural intelligence that the organization believes is needed. And so the obligation for the project manager is to be more specific and explicit in the communication, because you don't have that informal networking of running into somebody in the hall, as you mentioned.
Tim, I noticed that somebody sent in a question about trust,
Yeah.
and Lester and I can address that a little bit.
Right.
But again, as it relates to this particular topic, how do we sustain the culture and the values and foster meaningful relationships with people? And it becomes obvious in our work that there are many factors that go into that. Some of them we're aware of, but some of them we are not aware of. And so one of the factors that goes into trust is the impact of unconscious bias on who we value, who we trust, whose story we believe. And so actually, ironically, Lester and I are in the midst of a project right now where we have the owner of the project who has not really been in this kind of position before. And this person is having a very hard time trusting the project management team to do what they say they're going to do. And so is trying to micromanage a situation where they don't know as much as we do about what we're doing. They've never done this quite before, and we have. And yet there's a huge distrust issue of, you know, you're lying to me on your hours, and you're not really working that hard, and you're not doing this and you're not doing that, which is very unfounded on this person's part and very frustrating for those of us who are involved in the project. So trust is huge. Tim, you want to respond to trust, and then maybe Lester can add a little bit as well?
Sure. I mean, I think from my perspective, being a working program manager, one of the things that I do is provide micro promises, and I fulfill those promises. In a remote setting, it's really difficult to make the big promise of a project is actually the result of about 1 million small little decisions and times of fulfilling the things that you say you're going to do. So I do that by, for example, having my status reports out on time every time as much as I can. And if I blow it, which invariably we do, if I miss a deadline, then I fess up to it. So I think that there are ways to build that trust that are built from the ground up, that are built by doing what we say we're going to do, being vulnerable, listening, all the ingredients of a good, healthy, trusting relationship. Yeah, Lester.
Yeah, I want to mention that one of the key things to be aware of in regard to trust on project teams and in organizations in general is to become aware of your own and your teammates, particularly your own unconscious biases. You're not going to get trust between yourself and team members if you're a male and you tend not to listen or acknowledge the contributions of female team members, or if a team member has a fairly strong accent and you happen to have an unconscious bias against people with strong accents because you feel they haven't learned their English well enough and you're a native English speaker, you're not going to have trust because it's going to show. Your inability to take their ideas seriously, to acknowledge them, to listen to them as carefully as you listen to people who are like yourself in regard to gender, ethnicity, country you come from, and the like, is going to show. And the team trust will be eroded by this unconscious bias, which Skip and I are also publishing a book about later in this year.
Yeah, I think it's really important that at the core of your micro promise is trust that is grounded in a respectful and inclusive workplace. And the only way you're going to ever get to there is for you, one, to work on yourself, and two, for you to know the skills and talents of your team, and to work with them to the point that you can trust them, that together you are a high performing team.
Yeah.
And then if you're not a high performing team, if there is a weak link, then you have to have the courage of recognizing that perhaps that person needs to go work on something else, and you replace them with what's needed. But at the core is an honest look at yourself and others.
Yeah.
And I think about micro promises, I want to make one other point. I think it's very important for both the person who makes the promise and the person who's going to have the a deliverable from the promise delivered to them, that they both understand what the micro promise deliverable means to the project goal.
Yeah.
If you don't understand the benefit of why Tim is going to create a red flag page of his status report and what good that's going to do to the project goals and the project timeline, then you won't have as much trust about what he's focusing on. Right, Tim?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, next one. We said that another core skill is reskilling and adapting or readapting, as the case may be, to working in this distributed environment. So we use the term distributed environment to also mean remote workplace. And some of us have skills that are highly developed and highly refined, but the game has changed. And now those skills or that knowledge of technology or whatever it may be, or in my case, I have customers who say, we're not going to use Zoom anymore. We have to use Adobe Connect, or we're not going to use this. We have to use that. And so there's this constant challenge to reskill ourselves to adapt to this ever-changing environment. And again, when you layer on top of that knowledge doubling literally twice a day, all the knowledge in the world is doubling, that there's just too much knowledge out there. And Lester's right, you've got to be able to sort it and get to what it is you need so that you can quickly do what you do and do it well and accurately. And again, for me, the key is having a continuous learning mindset. You have to recognize that you're never going to know it all. And and for me, this is very frustrating for me personally. I'm the kind of person who likes to start a project, work real hard on it, finish it, feel good about it or feel bad about it, whatever happens, but move on to the next one. At least I got some closure. In this current environment that we're in, you never get closure. You never know it all. You never can stop learning. And so I believe this reskilling and out of the box thinking and adaptation to this environment is going to be crucial for many jobs, if not all jobs. Gentlemen, welcome to hear what you think. Tim?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the biggest skill that we as project program managers, portfolio managers, one of the biggest challenge areas is communication. And it's not so much I need to do more, it's the absence of the physical, we're missing a huge part of communication, the bulk of it, which is the body language and the face-to-face and the looking at each other and getting agreement based on being able to read your expressions and understand who you are and where you are in a particular proposition that I'm making. And that absence is what makes it so hard, I think, for many people, because you can't grasp it and re-skill on it. You can't suddenly get good at doing something that's just not there anymore. So we're all suffering from this lack of it. So all I can do is go by what I hear from you. And so to me, if there is a re-skilling there, I will tell you, I spend, and I don't know if this is the right way to do it or not, but I spend a ton of time on the phone. I do make many more phone calls and Zoom meetings, one-on-one or one with two, just trying to get a better take on it. It reminds me of these personality tests where they will ask you the same question 2 or 3 different ways. And in those 2 or 3 different ways, the truth kind of comes out about who you are. And I find myself doing that with my stakeholders, having multiple conversations to try to kind of tease out the what could have taken one meeting because it's just a discussion. So lacking that face-to-face, that real body language, which is such an important part of it, I find myself having to do more. So just as an administrative note, and I see that there's some chat in there. The slides are posted up on Google Drive. Thank you very, very much, Rebecca. So if you haven't already, go find that link and you can download the slides. Thanks.
So Tim, I think you're right. I think it's crucial for each of us as a project manager or program manager or leader to really be confident in our remote working skills and our remote working relationships. And it may take multiple meetings and multiple phone calls and a number of things that are different than the way we have done it in the past. So I think we have to be open to that. And we have to recognize that just because you don't need that level of communication, perhaps perhaps others on your team
Others
do.
do. Yeah.
And ultimately, you should be here for your team rather than your team be here for you. We're going to talk about that in a little while.
Yeah, and Tim, to follow up on your point about phone calls, we have a section of the book where we talk about the different types of electronic communication, email, texting, social media, phone calls, Zoom meetings, and the like. And one of the things we point out is that it's extremely important to know for each communication which medium is going to work best for which people and for what purpose you have to achieve in that medium. You're absolutely right. Email and texting, you can't see. Body language, sure, you can put an emoticon in or an emoji, but it doesn't tell you what the person is really thinking. So real-time communication via either video chat, a Zoom meeting, or phone calls in real time, synchronous communication, not asynchronous communication, becomes far more important, I think, than in the traditional on-site workplace, where if somebody's confused, you can just say, hey, let's go into a conference room for 10 minutes down the hall and iron it out. It's harder to iron things out without thinking about what's going to really work in the remote distributed environment. Wouldn't you agree, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
Might we go to the next slide?
Sure. Yeah. In today's hybrid work environment.
Lester, you want to?
Oh, sure. In today's hybrid.
No, you want to do that one, Lester?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Skip. In today's hybrid work environment, the lines between professional and personal life become blurred more than ever. What happens to us outside the workplace follows us into the workplace, and vice versa. Well, for many of us, outside the workplace and inside the workplace are just 2 rooms apart, or in some cases, 10 feet apart, or down the hall in our home, or upstairs and downstairs. It's very important to have ground rules for the shared space you have with your family members, people who are sharing a space with you. If you have a roommate, for example, to have ground rules about when you have to be left alone. It's best, of course, to have an office where you can close the door, but many people don't have the luxury of doing that working from home. You've got to have ground rules about interruptions, ground rules about what can be overlooked. But more than that, you also have to think about the people who are on your project team who are working from their homes. Many of them are going to be subject to the stress in their own family life. Maybe there's a sick child. Maybe there's a spouse who just had surgery, for example. And you're going to have to realize that you're going to have to be a little more flexible and adaptive to their situation, because they can't just come in to the office on site, close the door, and forget about what goes on. So a greater need for flexibility, compassion, empathy, awareness of the life situations of your team members is imperative.
I think that's great, Lester.
On a project setting.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, on a, for large companies, and there are a lot of large companies right now rethinking their real estate portfolio. I'm thinking recently of Goldman Sachs, for example. Here in the USA, Goldman Sachs, the investment bank, is moving out whole lines of business to remote workforce, and as well moving the management of that into out of New York City and down to Florida. And this is, that's an example that heralds a trend that's going on right now here in the US anyway, in industries like financial services, insurance, knowledge work, really, where it's readily adaptable to moving those individuals out of the office space and into a home environment. It's available. And so what I have seen is a lot of project work around that, right? So how do we get the right backgrounds? How do we get brand consistency? As I look at the screens right now, I see many different backgrounds. I see Mary has books behind her and I have whiteboards behind me. Right. And so if you are a major company, that's pretty unacceptable. And so the trend right now is, how can we streamline that? Lester has a background on him. Many companies are going to these virtual backgrounds so that we don't looking at our living rooms or our office space or what have you. But it's a challenge right now to if you're an individual consultant, no problem, right? I run a small company, a very small business, so it's no problem for me. But for many of these companies who are making who have a big, large scale distributed workforce, that concept of consistency and level of service is a real challenge right now. And it's going to happen into the future because they're all starting to see that actually working from home is good for the bottom line.
Yes, Timmy, what you said is very important. Organizations are realizing that the bottom line benefits of a distributed workforce comes back to them in very, very great expense savings. Real estate, for example, insurance on the real estate, facilities management,
Yeah.
to the point where some organizations are actually providing transportation for their employees to go to a satellite building in a much lower rent area of the metropolitan area, for example. I also want to mention one more thing about blurred lines. Part of what is blurring the lines is that there you are, if you have a family working at home, you have children who've been remoted also. And there's going to be the issue, you may not want to have a nanny or a helper in the house for COVID reasons. So the issue of how you manage children who are working remote, who are learning remotely while keeping your focus on your work is becoming hard for a great many people. And that requires a lot of thinking about it, particularly in a two-spouse household. In a household where both spouses are working remotely for organizations. So these all things all have to be thought out that never existed before.
I think the price of utilities as well in some of these large buildings, a phenomenal amount of money is spent on utilities and keeping it warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And you're right. So there's tremendous savings on the part of high rent organizations. There's also tremendous savings on the part of the remote worker, not having to get up every day and drive 3 hours. Some families are able to, instead of having two cars with a husband and a wife working or whoever, they are able to downsize to one car and one insurance and save that money and bank that car payment every month. There are a number of different ways. You don't have to go to dry cleaners as much. You don't have to get your hair done as much. You don't have to buy new clothes as much. You don't have to repair your car as much. Your insurance can go down because you're not driving as much. So there are savings on the part. You don't have to. A huge one is daycare. If you don't have to pay $1,000 a week for someone to watch your two kids, now you're able to keep them at home. That's a mixed blessing, yes, but it's a monetary savings for the worker. So we see that in our research that there are a number of remote workers that are reluctant to give that up.
Interesting point. Both in Europe and in the U.S., for the year ended 12/31/20, our net carbon output was something like 30, at least in the US, it was about 30% down. Literally, it's beneath the target by 30%. In Europe, it's down as well. I don't know the percent, but both geographies have experienced massive environmental benefit because of, we're not commuting, we're not doing as much. All right, so let's keep going. We've got, I think, one more trend to uncover, and then we'll open it up.
Skip, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll do this one. We use a term called unbossed, and it's not a term that we invented, but it's a term that we've adopted, and it basically signifies that one of our responsibilities as a project manager in this COVID remote working situation is to adapt a new functional leadership style. And so being unbossed is an evolving concept in organizational design and structure that replaces a typical previous bureaucratic, hierarchical, top-down leadership style. I say do it, you do it. I don't want to hear what you have to say kind of a thing. Instead of this top-down management, it's a leadership style where the leader supports the team, and rather than the team supporting the leader. And so Lester and I occasionally teach leadership workshops, and there are different types of leadership. Situational leadership is one, and there are others, but some of them are more people focused. Some of them are less about me as the manager and more about you as the worker. And I think that's one style we might want to take a serious look at. So, as a project manager, how will you adopt this unbossed managerial approach without losing control of your project? I think that's a question that I'm addressing. And I think it's a question that perhaps some of you might wish to address at all. What's the difference between being unbossed and a self-directed team? Is there a difference? What's the philosophical difference between traditional project management and instead of the team, the leader, the team supporting the leader, now you as the leader support the team? Gentlemen, open to your thoughts as well.
Lester, after you, sir.
Well, I want to mention the fact that one of the organizations that is at the forefront and pioneering the concept of unbossed is Novartis Pharmaceuticals, the largest global drug manufacturer, and they did it for a very specific reason, over and above the fact that there were issues with hierarchical command and control structure. They were doing it because they wanted to enhance the degree of innovation and creativity in their organization. They can't survive without having new ideas for drug products, new ideas for what kinds of illnesses to do testing on the current drugs with and the like. And they feel that the teams that were working in the unbossed environment had a much higher level of innovation and creativity that was successful in terms of the outcome of from a business point of view. And they've adopted it now. The entire $55 billion organization, headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, now believes in an unbossed approach. And they realized they had to train their entire leadership from senior executives all the way down to project managers and team leads in this approach because it's such a new approach. What they've also found, though, is that it works much better in the remote distributed environment, and that it doesn't lead to a reduction in creativity, but actually leads to an increase in innovation.
Sure. Yeah, and I think to me this is an interesting place for us as project managers because we've all been unbossed for our careers, right? In fact, I think project managers, maybe more than any other role in an organization, depend upon our ability to influence, to bring in others into a project, to work with others in a way that is based around dotted line relationships more than probably most other roles, right? With the exception of maybe the C-suite, where it's all about influence and leadership. John, I think to your question, John had a good question in the chat. Does the panel have thoughts on different styles of leadership for the digital natives versus boomers versus millennials, especially in the online space? I will say this, in the work that I do and from what I see that is I perceive as working well. The concept of servant leadership, I think, is really important here. In other words, I think what in a digital environment, what is needed less is highly directive styles of leadership. It's hard to read that language. Now, I know that there are times and there are industries where directive leadership is absolutely necessary, and particularly in very hierarchical types of organizations. In knowledge work, in the work that much of the professional space is in, I think a coaching model of leadership is very helpful right now. In other words, encouraging, and the concept of servant leadership. That is, that I, as somebody on a project, am clearing the way. I'm creating a space for the team to do its work. Yeah, and Thomas, that's a great point.
I want to say one other thing also, Tim, in regard to what Novartis found. They found that adopting an unbossed philosophy made the organization more inclusive by a variety of measurements. They also found that ideas were coming from people who previously had not been included or who had been marginalized, such as people who hadn't been on in the organization that long. Many organizations have an unconscious bias against people who don't have a certain amount of seniority because they can't know what's going on. So they found that diversity of sources of new ideas and creative innovation was much greater in the unbossed environment than in the previous command and control structure.
Yeah.
So it has many benefits, particularly around a higher level of inclusiveness and a higher level of innovation.
Let me ask, so I'd like to open this up for just a few minutes to anyone to kind of raise a point. Bex, if you could just kind of open up the microphones, if anybody would like to just share their thoughts on some of these points.
Everybody should be able to unmute.
Oh, great.
So.
Anyone care to jump in with a thought?
Well, this is Skip. I'll add a little bit to what you said, Tim, which is we live in an interesting time where it is possible for the first time ever that you could have 5 different generations on your project team. You could have baby boomers like myself. You might even have traditionalists, people my parents' age, who get involved because they have certain expertise. And then you have Gen X and Gen Y and millennials. And so there is a possibility that you might have a number of different generations on your team.
What's the challenge for the project manager, Skip, in that context?
Well, for me personally, I tend to shy away from treat all millennials this way and treat all traditionalists that way. And I rather try to get to know the individual as an individual and ask them, how can I help you be successful? What do you need from me on this particular project?
Yeah.
Let me tell you what I need from you.
Yeah.
Let's explore how we can work together to make this easier for both of us. And so it's just me. I mean, there's lots of books out there on how to work with millennials and, Gen X's and Gen Y's. But my personal philosophy is I try to deal with the individual on an individual level.
Yep.
And try to get to know him or her and find out what their experience is, because their experience is very different than mine. And explore with them. For many people, they've never had a manager sit down with them and ask them their opinion. How can I help you be successful? Tell me what you need.
Yeah.
Most of us haven't had that experience. It's usually people telling us what to do, and it's a one-way communication. And if we miss something or misunderstand something, then we get yelled at. And that, in my opinion, doesn't work very well. But I'm open to others' opinions. What's your experience?
One of the thing in regard to the question about digital natives, I think managing digital natives involves the project manager or team leader also making sure that that the digital native doesn't have an a 100% bias toward trusting digital solutions. That there has
Yeah.
to be a human element to the interaction.
Yep. We're getting it all. Yeah. All right. Well, let's use that song as a
Segue, yeah.
segue to the conclusion.
Okay, Tim, you want to lead that, or you?
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. Well, so in the last 7 or 8 minutes that we have together, Lester and I did some research, and we found that while there are many, many books out there that talk about how managers should manage remote workers, there was no single book out there just for the remote worker. And so what we started to do was put together what are some of the key issues that we think workers have to be aware of. And then as the more we worked, we realized that, hey, you know, there's enough material here actually to create a book. And then there's ongoing materials that we can add to this as we go along. So while the book will be published in March and it'll be, 150, 200 page book, we also see it as a living document, and we will be adding to that. We also have reached out to some of our international colleagues, and we're getting some input from them on perhaps some of the nuances in remote work in the US and Canada versus remote work in other countries. And so there may be an opportunity to add some additional insights to the book in that way.
Right.
But because IPMA is sponsoring this particular interview, we have offered a 20% discount to anyone who might wish to get a copy of the book.
Great.
And we really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share things with you about it. I think it's clear that as you get a chance to look at the PowerPoint slides that we provided, that there are new demands on project managers, that artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to become increasingly important in project management.
Yeah.
There's a new focus on collaboration and on project management. There is a requirement for encouraging creativity and flexibility in your remote working workforce.
Yeah.
And that's going to require skills on the part of the project manager. Coaching and mentoring is increasingly important. And so we need to spend some time talking about that. We need to recognize that some of these new skills and structures and technology and things that are facing us offer different challenges to some of our team members, and we face these challenges differently. So we can't just go into our project management meetings with the idea that we have the answers and we know what's what. We really have to explore with our teams. And we use micro messages. You call micro promises, you don't promise anything more than you can deliver, but we use micro messages like, how can I help you be successful? And here's what I need from you. And I think those are important skills that each of us need to develop. The bottom line is we need to be resilient in ourselves, and we need to promote resilience in those of us that we're working with. And we have to recognize that nobody's ever had to deal with this much change before, ever in human history. And so we have to cut some people some slack and, give some people some grace. And we also need to monitor ourselves, because there's lots of research that people are self-medicating more. Alcohol consumption has gone up. Isolation is a factor. Overeating. There's a lot of dynamics that go into work and home, and the blurring of those environments, and not having time to transition from work and drive home and get your headspace into a different place. So by the time you arrive home, you're ready to be home.
Sure.
Now,
And
there is,
if I may add to that, part of the blurring phenomenon is that there's a greater possibility of of overworking, of burning out. Pardon me, of feeling you need to be on, you need to be connected to your email 24/7. And therefore, there's a blurring between work time and personal relaxation and personal lifetime as well, particularly for people who live by themselves and don't have anyone at home with them in a COVID environment where you're isolated. So it's really, really important, as Skip says, to be self-aware that you're not engaging in behaviors that could lead to burnout or some kind of self-medication. You've got to find time for yourself, find time for hobbies, find time for non-work interests. It's very, very important in a way that wasn't in the past.
Gentlemen, let me thank you both very, very much for your time, for your expertise. You all can see up here on the screen their contact information. Hopefully you've captured some of that. Thomas, I see your last comment here. Cultural theories state that different areas have more or less expectation of a leadership hierarchy in place. Yes, Mary. Hofstede calls it power distance. Those would encounter more problems in trying to apply servant leadership. Yes, people from this culture expect to be led by a boss. Yeah, thank you for that. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. We are going to save the chat. We are going to save the recording here. And let me just quickly, if you don't mind, let me just run you back over to here really quickly. So again, Skip and Lester, thank you so much for your time. Everyone here is going to get a proof of participation for this. So this is a great, as we are evolving here, we're providing proof of participation so that you can use that as proof of having attended, and use that for all of your CEU and professional development units and everything else that you might need that for. So thank you all for doing that. Next month, and those will be emailed to you. Let me finish that up by saying those will be emailed to you.
Sorry, Jim. Just please, everybody, write your full name and surname into the chat so that we know to whom do we give the certificate. So please, if you want one, just write your name and surname into the chat. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. While you're doing that, let me just invite you on February 18th to a really exciting half-day event. This will take place from 3 p.m. in the afternoon to 7 p.m. CET, so Central European time. And it's a half-day conference called The Future of New. And we have 3 absolutely amazing speakers coming up. One is the first keynote is Michael Lurick, who wrote the Design Thinking Playbook. He is an international best-selling author of a series of books published by Wiley on design thinking. The second speaker is Susan Reed. She is an innovation guru. She has worked with more than 200 brands to develop products, and she'll be talking about do's and don'ts and portfolio management as it relates to innovation. And finally, we have A-list Hollywood director David Dobkin. He directed such movies as Wedding Crashers from way back in the day, and a whole host of others. He's a writer, he's a director, a producer, and he will be joining us for a conversation about creativity in projects. So he's no stranger to that. So I invite everyone to this event. You should see those. Go check it out on LinkedIn. So thank you all very much. It is right at the top of the hour. We're just a moment over. So thank you all. I really appreciate your time and attention today. Go check out sig.ipma.world, brand new website. So please go check that out, sig.ipma.world, and you'll find all the information about upcoming events and the different SIGs. So everyone have a great day. Thank you all for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.